Now, I know you might be a little bit confused. Siege and Jekyll and Hyde in the same video? Let me explain. I'm an English teacher, but I'm also a champion on Rainbow Six Siege. I know GCSE revision can become a chore for many people, but recently I've been thinking a lot about how teachers can overcome this problem, and this will be sort of like an experiment for me. I'm not sure how much information you might retain from this video, considering the crazy gameplay that you're going to be watching at the same time, but I'll give it a go nonetheless. This is English revision with a champion R6 player. The novel was written by this guy called Robert Louis Stevenson in 1886. It tells the story of a respectable doctor called Henry Jekyll who experiments with separating his good and evil sides, only to create a violent and uncontrollable alter ego, and the ego's name is Edward Hyde. Hyde is like the ugliest creature you can think of, but when I think of Dr. Jekyll, I imagine him looking a bit like Fenrir. You know, he's got dark under eyes, he's like a mad scientist. The novel focuses on deep themes of duality and the consequences of pushing moral boundaries, and this is to reflect the anxieties of Victorian society. The first theme we're looking at is duality of human nature. Stevenson explores the idea that every person has both a good side and an evil side, and that these two sides are always in conflict. Dr. Jekyll is meant to be the respectable moral side, whereas Mr. Hyde is the darker, more violent side that Jekyll tries to suppress, but ultimately loses control over. Before I move on to key quotes and grade 9 analysis, I'm going to let you watch the end of this clip that's been playing in the background, where I do end up getting my ace. Please drop a like if you happen to be enjoying this video so far. Oh my god.
Can't plant a ball maybe?
Yeah, he's lying down behind the snooker table. He got up.
10 seconds left.
Rotate.
Bomb diffusion initiated.
Oh, you're so defusing.
You're good, bro. You're better.
This quote shows Jekyll acknowledging that he's not a unified, purely good person, but a mixture of both good and evil. Stevenson is challenging the Victorian idea of maintaining strict moral standards, suggesting that everyone has darker impulses they must confront. The repetition of truly reinforces the inevitability of this conflict. Jekyll's attempt to separate these two sides reflects how dangerous it is to deny or suppress part of who we are, leading to disastrous consequences in the form of Hyde. Stevenson is using juxtaposition here between the words better and worse to show the internal conflict that Jekyll is facing. His better self symbolizes his morality and social respectability, while his worse self represents the darker, unchecked desires that he tries to suppress. So Jekyll is essentially admitting that the more he tries to suppress his darker side, the more it takes over, and the metaphor of losing hold represents his gradual loss of control over Hyde, reflecting the dangers of trying to completely separate good and evil. Another way to think about it is that Stevenson is showing that human nature is not entirely black and white, and that the attempt to suppress natural impulses leads to chaos. Now let's talk about the consequences of unchecked ambition. In Siege terms, this is where you peek an angle that your friend told you not to peek, and then you miss and you sell the whole round. In Jekyll and Hyde, Dr. Jekyll's desire to push scientific and moral boundaries leads to his downfall. His experiment to separate his dual nature ends up causing chaos, both for him and those around him. There's a real sense of irony here, because Jekyll thinks he can control Hyde, but Hyde eventually takes control. It's an example of dramatic irony. As we know, his experiment has already failed. Jekyll's overconfidence shows how ambition can blind people to the risks. Stevenson is warning that unchecked ambition, especially within the field of science, leads to self-destruction. Jekyll's inability to see Hyde's growing power mirrors Victorian concerns about the dangers of pursuing progress without considering the moral consequences. Here we have a metaphor in the caged devil which symbolizes Jekyll's repressed desires. The word roaring suggests that these desires are violent and uncontrollable when released. This metaphor reflects how Jekyll's ambition backfires. By trying to hide his darker side, he only makes it stronger. Stevenson shows that repressing one's desires or moral limits for the sake of ambition can lead to disaster, which mirrors Victorian fears of overreaching in science and morality. Okay, I think that's a wrap on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We've covered two major themes, the duality of human nature and the consequences of unchecked ambition. And we've also broken down some key quotes and literary devices that will help you ace your GCSEs. Remember, Stevenson is warning us about the dangers of ignoring the darker side of ourselves and pushing moral limits too far. Keep those themes and quotes locked in and use them to show the examiner that you know your stuff. If this helped, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what other texts you want me to cover. I'm thinking about A Christmas Carol, but I'm also open to other suggestions. All that being said, I will catch you next time. Take care, guys.